Hello and welcome. What if we could create new forms of valuable and productive work? Artificial intelligence has prompted an unprecedented wave of experimentation at work. During this webinar, we will learn about the quickly evolving landscape of work and how we might create new forms of work with two prominent thought leaders shaping AI in the future of work. My name is Liz Gerber, and I am the co-director of Northwestern's Center for Human-Computer Interaction and Design. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Eric Horvitz, Chief Scientific Officer of Microsoft, and Dr. David Autor, Rubinfeld Professor of Economics at MIT. At Microsoft, Dr. Horvitz leads initiatives that bridge scientific discovery, technology, and societal impact with a strategic focus on AI. He has made significant contributions to AI theory and practice, particularly in reasoning and decision-making under uncertainty. David Autor is the co-director of the Labor Studies Program and the Shaping the Future of Work initiative at MIT. His research explores the labor market impacts of technological change and globalization on job polarization, skill demands, and earning levels and inequality. While both have too many accomplishments to list today, we highlight just one. In November, Dr. Horvitz and Autor were contributing authors to the National Academies Report on Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Work. Today, we are here to discuss this report with them. In just a minute, I'm going to ask them to summarize what they see as the opportunities and challenges in this report for those of us who may not have the opportunity to have read it yet. But in the meantime, I want to let you know that this event is being recorded. We invite attendees to post questions in the question and answer column. Chat will only be utilized for sharing resources. So, Eric, let's start with you. What is the report about in your mind?
Well, Elizabeth, thanks. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting David and I to have a conversation today. The report that we're talking about, which came out just a few months ago as a National Academies consensus study, actually was a follow-on to an earlier study that I was involved with the same two co-chairs, Eric Bielsen and Tom Mitchell, on automation, computing automation and the future of the U.S. workforce, that looked broadly at IT and automation. And I worked very diligently back then in 2017 on the AI section, which was kind of a portion of a larger story. We had some examples back then, almost 8 years ago now. And the key conclusion of that work was we needed to gather more evidence. We just were flying in the dark about how computing technologies were affecting the workplace and the economy more generally. This study kicked off focusing on artificial intelligence, which is kind of a rising technology of our time. And I think one interesting backstory on this study, and I'd love to hear David's comments on this as well. My team at Microsoft gained access to GPT-4 in August of 2022, and even seasoned AI researchers were falling off their chairs. We just couldn't, we didn't expect to see this kind of competency in the system. And I was part of the study, and I couldn't really talk about GPT-4 publicly or even with this consensus study until months into the study. I don't know if, David, you remember when I think in January or February of 2023, I said, okay, everybody, I've been sitting here listening to the discussion, but let me just give everybody a sense for what this new thing, which will be released soon, GPT-4, can do. I think that created a kind of even a shift in the seriousness and potential implications of the focus of this technology. So with that, let me dive into some of the quickly dive into some of the findings in the study. If you could look at the actual study and read it, you'll see we start out by we didn't go as much as a dozen, but maybe it's less than a baker's dozen, whatever you call it, but 11 findings which we called out. But the first one's the most interesting one, I think, where I think for the first time in the history of reflection about AI technologies, we're getting comfortable saying as economists and AI researchers that AI is a general purpose technology, kind of like the steam engine or electricity. They've had, they'll have widespread applications and will likely, like the steam engine and electricity, be key drivers of economic growth sooner or later. And we also pointed out that there's a lot of uncertainty. We see lots of rapid progress, and it's hard to chart the future course given the technologies are evolving so quickly, even in just a few months since we published this report. And that suggests that there's a wide error bands, just like in the 2017 report. We just don't know enough. And therefore, we had to sort of think through contingencies and possibilities and scenarios in the report. Second finding is that, as of the publication of the last report, AI systems, including those large-scale language models that are at the focus of attention these days, they have multiple challenges, even if technologists are working hard and people in policy and government are trying to give incentives to help to shape these systems to exhibit less biased behavior, to be more accurate, to hallucinate less in situations where hallucination is not a good thing, and to reason correctly from facts. A third finding was that, which I think we all agree now, we expect fast-paced advances in this area, but we don't know exactly on the timing or the nature of these advances. The fourth finding, it was basically that the capabilities will be applicable to a large number of cognitive tasks in the economy, and will probably spur complementary innovations. And I think the fifth finding is really particularly important for our discussion today. And this comes out of the consideration of what happened with earlier general purpose technologies. I know Eric Bjolfson would talk about electricity and how long it took to have complementary investments in processes and structures and even conceptions of how you deploy, let's say, electric motors in industry. So achieving the full benefits of AI in terms of how it might intersect with people in society will require, and it could take quite a bit of time, complementary changes in the world, complementary investments in skills, for example, processes and structures. And again, the implications, finding 6 was that the labor market consequences of widespread deployments of these technologies. And we should keep in mind that AI is not one thing, by the way. There's a constellation of technologies. It will depend on the technologies, how they're deployed, what the demographics are in particular situations, what social, institutional, and political forces might be, and not necessarily technology-centric determination of where they're going to go. And then again, I'll just stop with 7, and maybe David can pick up on taking it further. But there's this whole notion of fear, right, about how AI will displace workers, but it can also improve worker outcomes. There's often a focus on displacement models and anxieties about that. But you can imagine that there's new forms of work, new kinds of expertise that are required for that work. And one of my areas of research over the last, it's almost 25 years, maybe nearing 30, it's kind of scary, is what's the opportunity for technologies and human-centric designs and processes that really weave together human intellect and cognition with these systems, and even have them co-evolve so that you can have new kinds of work. You can see new kinds of symbioses between human cognition and machine intelligence. And I think we don't think enough about that direction. And so let me pass things on maybe to David right now, because we have a few more findings.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I appreciate the likeness to electricity. And David, I'd be remiss to not introduce you as what The Economist called you in 2019, the academic voice of the American worker. So please speak.
That's a big building to live up to. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and honor to serve on this committee and to be with people like Eric, who are so close to technology. And I'm not a technologist. I'm a labor economist, and I think about things in terms of the labor market. And I do think the labor market is kind of a central organizing institution of our society, because work is an important part of what almost everybody does with their time if they're of working age. So it doesn't just structure income. It structures identity, friendship, social connections, meaning, Not everybody loves their work, but even if you don't love your work is probably a very important part of the thing you do. And so I think, the big questions for me around AI, and I think many people are asking this, is, well, what does this mean for my work? And what does this mean for my opportunities and the values of my skills? What am I doing now that I won't be doing? What do I need to do? And I think, we should be clear that this doesn't have a simple answer at this point. And, just as Eric alluded to with electricity, it took decades to figure out what it's for. I think AI is actually, we're very much in the stage of kind of like, what is this tool good for? Because what it's not is a better, cheaper version of something else, right? AI is not good for many things traditional computers were good at, right? It's like, it's not a better spreadsheet. You don't want a spreadsheet that hallucinates, right? You don't want a dictionary that can't tell facts from hallucinations, right? AI is great for many things, but it's not just a better calculator. It really isn't. But it is a tool. And the past technological transitions that Eric referred to have also been important transitions for the labor market, right? So the movement from the sort of artisanal era to the era of mass production, the era of the mass production to the computer era, and now really this transition we're undergoing now. And each of them has come with displacement of some forms of expertise, even as they've instated demands for other things, right? So, the industrial era really wiped out skilled artisans, people who were like, weavers and blacksmiths and very skilled people who made things by hand, one from end to end. And, like you've all heard of the Luddites rising up to smash the power looms in Victorian England. They weren't wrong to be afraid. In fact, mechanization did wipe out their livelihoods. It raised living standards in England, but it took six decades before workers really started to benefit. So one should not be, even if you think the long-term benefits are great, one should recognize that there are real costs, the transitions are painful, and often the people on the upside are not the same as people on the downside. When we moved, so the industrial era created a whole new type of work for people who are literate and numerate, often in factories and offices. The computer era then wiped out some of that in factories and offices because many things that required numerate literate people could be done by computers. AI is now a really different set of capabilities. AI is not good at following rules and sequences in the way that traditional computing did, but what it can do is kind of learn inductively like we do. Things that we don't know the explicit rules for, but we recognize the patterns, we understand intuitively what to do. It can also, I don't want to say the same as us, but do things like us that we would think of as creative or intuitive if done by people, whether it's developing a new way of attacking a problem or creating an illustration or writing text and so on. Now, how we use that is very open-ended, right? One way to use it is, as many people imagine, is to automate stuff. Like, let's figure out as many things that we can apply this to that people are doing and just get the people out of the way. And corporations, not through evil intent think that way. Labor is a cost, just like any other input cost, and you would like to reduce it. Simultaneously, there's a lot of potential complementarities between AI and human cognition and human expertise. And I think it's particularly valuable, what I think of AI is most valuable for is supplementing human judgment in lots of tasks that we do where the stakes are pretty high, but there's not clear-cut answers, whether it's diagnosing a patient or, remodeling a kitchen or, doing some type of skilled repair or even architecting a piece of software. And what AI is really good for is kind of providing guidance and guardrails for how to do that, giving suggestions, giving feedback. And that, not only is that useful to people who do that type of work, right? So if I don't use AI for first copywriting, but I definitely use it to critique my writing and to read my letters and tell me where they're good and where they're weak and so on. Lots of us are in that work where we have to, in that type of work, where we have to make those types of decisions. But the really best case scenario for AI, in my opinion, and this is really a choice, is to enable more people to do valuable decision-making work, right? If we use it well, we have people in medicine, millions of people work in medicine who have expertise up and down the line. If we could enable them to expand their scope of practice, right? Allow nurse practitioners to do a larger variety of diagnostic tasks. If we could allow enable kitchen contractors to also be doing design, if we could enable people, software coding is something that, occurs at many, many different levels of proficiency and technical expertise. Website coding, right, is actually a pretty trivial task, writing in HTML, and now there's tools that do almost all that for you. But that automation has not wiped out website development as a job. In fact, it's enabled many more people to do it, and it's now a very specialized activity. So in the best case scenario, and this is not the only scenario, we will use AI to extend the kind of reach and relevance of human expertise to now enable more people to do valuable work. I'm going to stop there, but I just want to emphasize that's not a prediction, that's a possibility. And the future is not predictable because it depends on choices, because we're designing it. So we should recognize that we have to make decisions about what to prioritize and how to use these tools, because we have a variety of possible paths in front of us.
And this, just to add to what David's saying, and I want to keep in mind that it's not, we tend to have this bias of the current terrain of tasks and the nature of work today. And when we think about various kinds of things that, like say in medicine, that AI could do, and there are direct applications, like we help a physician or team of physicians make more accurate diagnoses, to watch out with memory jogging to avoid the insidious problem of adverse outcomes, avoidable adverse outcomes for hospitalized patients. Can we use dictation and summarization to lighten the administrative burden that physicians really are grappling with more and more today with the digitalization of healthcare? But there are other very different kinds of possibilities. So as an example, right now I'm working with a team at Columbia. We had this really interesting idea at Columbia Medical School, the biomedical informatics department. They said, you know, there's a chasm between what nurses do and what physicians do in terms of the sociology and the communication between them, and issues of who listens to who. There's a whole stream of nursing progress notes that's often very much distinct and separate from the clinician's notes. We just asked the question, could today's language models look at the nurse stream and look at the clinician stream and weave together and pull out content that would be critically relevant to patient outcomes, and summarize it and voice it in the main clinical notes? It doesn't exist today. And a prototype. So this is very interesting. We're now kind of trying to evaluate that. But who would have thought that AI could change the whole sociological interaction between nurses and physicians to create better notes and following of patients, for example? So I'm just saying this. It's always, there could be whole new innovative approaches we haven't really thought deeply about, because they haven't been things we could do in the past.
So based on your collective years of experience, my question comes up, and we're getting something from the audience on this too, is how do we get there? We've heard many tragic stories of people's jobs being eliminated. We don't want to redo that, or we want to do it maybe more mindfully. I'm not quite sure. But how do we get to the future that we want to see and live in?
Yeah, and was just thinking about your how question. There's a kind of almost like two different streams of how people think about this. And I'm sure David has thoughts on this too, and we didn't necessarily talk about a lot about this in the document, the National Academy study. But there's the idea of like what will happen laissez-faire, like what happens with our economy and the tensions to do X, Y, or Z to make things more efficient, to shift jobs in some way. And then it's the idea of like what can we do via policy, governance, incentives, proactive efforts to train, to create new kinds of AI tools to guide and shape the way things go. You know, some folks believe that this idea of shared prosperity can happen through governance and guidance, and it won't necessarily if you just have laissez-faire interactions between little pieces of the economy and existing AI tools. So there's the whole idea of like, how much can we do to shape versus how much should we just say, put up our, wring our hands and say, look, let's things will just happen. Let's watch and we'll see as we go. I don't know if David, you have thoughts on that?
Well, so I think certainly there we seem to be in the going in the direction of just letting it rip and seeing what happens. I'm not sure that's the best approach. And I think there's a kind of a myth in America that we've always just let the market decide and then we all just adjust to that. But that's not really true. We have, the government has had an enormous role in shaping technology, right? It's at sort of at the heart of the information age, of the space age, of most of the medicines that we have, and this started in earnest really during the Second World War, and has continued through the kind of funding of our science infrastructure for decades. Now that is being defunded even as we speak in real time. Any of us could lose our jobs. But I think so. In terms of where to focus, I think that's an important question. Because I think it is a question. There's a lot of room for design, and designing how we use these tools and what do we want them to do. And so if we had to say, well, what are some target areas where there's really good opportunity and where we have a lot of public leverage, I would say there are three of them. One, as I mentioned earlier, and as Eric alluded to, is in healthcare, right? Healthcare in the United States, it consumes almost 1 in 5 US dollars. And it employs an enormous number of people. There's unlimited demand for healthcare. We can never run out of work in healthcare. And there's very inconsistent quality of care and quantity of care and access to care. And around the world, it's a much, much more serious problem. And there's a place where we could use better tools to, one, lower costs. And I don't mean just frontier tools. I mean everyday things, everyday diagnostic software, everyday monitoring, everyday management of medical records, right? To lower costs, improve access, and in the best case, also to improve the quality of work by enabling people to use their skills more effectively. So instead of doing drudge work, instead of doing dangerous heavy lifting, for example, as occurs in many care settings, we use machinery for those things, and we enable people to focus on care. And care doesn't just mean empathy. Care is expert work that requires an interface, an interaction between what you see and what you understand, and a base of knowledge. And then you have better tools to expand it. And medicine is filled with tools, right? You wouldn't want to be a doctor without a stethoscope. You wouldn't want to be a radiologist without, without access to X-ray tools. And really, our modern medicine just wouldn't even be feasible without these set of things. And modern medicine has become much more specialized over time as our tools have gotten better. And that's why there are so many specialties in medicine. It's not because work is getting narrower, it's because it's getting deeper. But so medicine is one area. And another reason to mention medicine, well, half of all medicine is ultimately paid for by the federal government through Medicare or through some healthcare subsidy, right? So it's not private sector. It may be delivered by the private sector, but much of the payer is the public. A second area is education, right? Education, follows a very industrial model, and it's not as personalized as it could be. I don't foresee a future where AI takes over teaching, but it certainly could be an incredibly useful supplement to educators. But again, it won't do it on its own. It really takes a lot of innovation to figure out how to do that well. And we've had basically most educational innovations have been something of a failure, right? Since the chalkboard, not that much progress. I mean, when I was in school, there were film strips, right? There were massively open online courses that really haven't educated that many people, unfortunately. And so it's going to take better tools. And then a third area, and I think Eric would agree with me on this as well, and many of you would, is frontier science itself, right? AI, we already know, is, a great tool for advancing frontier science. So for example, the AlphaFold piece of software for protein folding, right, was part of the Nobel Prize in October of last year. But we also see this in material science, and we see this, kind of throughout the world. And things that improve the rate of discovery, right, allow us to tackle disease more effectively, allow us to deal with climate change, energy generation, telecommunications. So there's great, and also hunger and creating food more efficiently. So there's these are three. So let me I'll repeat myself and stop. Healthcare, education, and science. If we used AI well in just those three areas and just threw it away everywhere else, we would still get an enormous, enormous gain.
I have to say, David, I agree with those three areas. Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to, one of our guests, our audience members, piped in about unpaid labor, particularly caregiving, both for children and the growing adult population. And I'm wondering if you would put that under education, or would you consider that important?
I view that care as part of the broader healthcare system, right? And we have a society, we have an aging society, right? We have relatively few young people. We have many people who are living longer and longer. That's wonderful. And they have earned and deserve to receive care and support, for as long as they live. And that's something we're gonna have to deliver. And that requires, resources, and it requires time. And if we have better tools, we can do that better.
Yeah, and I was going to make some comments that there are some huge upsides, of course, in the sciences. I'm so excited about where bioscience is going, not just to understand, for example, the structure of molecules, but how they function, to allow, we're now designing new entities and reagents that will play a role in solving some long-term challenging diseases like the chronic diseases of autoimmune cancers. I think in our lifetimes, we'll be seeing some huge jumps, and they'll be attributable directly to AI versus a combination of things.
Eric, can you just briefly, because you have an MD, can you briefly describe how that's happening and how that contrasts to how we used to do drug discovery and scientific discovery, just for folks who are not familiar with that area?
Well, it's a fairly large terrain right now, but there's a lot going on with using AI technologies to help with even drug repurposing. So drugs that are already that have already been admitted into usage by FDA protocols and clinical trials, finding how you can take some existing drugs and actually target rare diseases with them in new ways. But the whole idea right now is you can look at AI technologies as providing what you might call a computational microscope for seeing, for predicting structure and function of molecules, for identifying interactions among proteins in the eukaryotic proteome, that's the cells that we're made of, that have not been recognized before, by predicting what proteins will interact with what proteins. That gives us a sense for how cells work. I just co-authored an article that came out on an anniversary issue of Cell Journal that, what's the prospect of having an AI-powered virtual cell to do experiments in silico to really speed up the process by which we do our science. AI systems are being used to, I'll just characterize it because I know David brought up material science as well as biology, but there's some great examples where predicted many decades to get to X, we're getting there in weeks and months now. New kinds of batteries for storage that can help with sustainability that use much less lithium, which is a rare metal that is hard to gain access to, for example. The basic idea of how AI systems are being used for discovery with materials and even biology, for example, new antibiotics, is you build a model that can expand the feasible space of possibilities of candidates much bigger than we've considered in the past. And then you apply related AI technologies to take that expanded set of possibilities and quickly and efficiently hone it down to candidates that are most likely to have the right properties of manufacturability and durability and efficacy. So this process was used, for example, to discover and to identify from a gigantic, say a boatload, but a huge database of possible reagents, new kinds of antibiotics that work in a whole different way than antibiotics have worked to date. Now, bacteria are getting used to the ways we've attacked them in the past with antibiotics, so they become resistant. All of a sudden, we have a new antibiotic came out of Jim Collins' team at MIT that we looked at very carefully after the AI discovered it, and we find that it actually shorts out bacterial cells by shorting out their electromotive force across membranes, a new whole process, a new approach that they can't resist right now. So it just gives you a sense for what's happening in this space. It's very, very exciting. I've been involved in a whole set of efforts that makes me very excited. We'll be surprised by the positive outcomes in these spaces. And I think that if anything's going to help us with climate, despite, we can talk more about power usage and data centers and more CO2 being pumped into the air because of the electrical needs of AI. But I think the big wins will be with material science and chemistries to help with pulling carbon out of the air, for example, and doing something interesting with it, sequestering it. That'll come through AI material science work. But I want to get back really to jobs in the economy. So I think that, back to your earlier question, Liz, I think we're going to have to really rigorously monitor the influences of AI technologies on jobs in the economy and creatively, based on tracking and data collection, pursue policies, but as well as technologies, because we can actually shape the technologies that do promote notions of shared prosperity rather than increased economic disparity, We could prioritize R&D innovations that I particularly am a fan of this because I think it's very promising, that bring people and AI systems together in new forms of collaborative work. Now, if you look at even great HCI work right now in the Chi community, in HComp, collective intelligence communities, a lot of these human-centered design-oriented research projects, we've barely scratched the surface on human AI collaborative possibilities. It's such a great area for research right now. And here's what I think we can do. We can think deeply about new forms of collaborative work that support what I'll say is the primacy of human agency and contribution. And I think that these kind of technologies can foster social and economic inclusion in the face of this AI-driven automation that we're looking at. How many people? Here's an example. What kind of, so everyone's using LLMs to generate text, okay? I think it's a popular use case. It's like, here's a particular user experience, a conversational model with a chatbot. Well, can we get more creative than that? But let's just start with that for a second. Have we seen great applications that let you write an essay and then have the system understand that you are the author, but you'd like some editorial feedback? What's a great user experience for that? I found myself, I enjoy writing my own stuff. I don't feel comfortable saying, here's a couple of bullets, give me an essay. Even for email these days, if I have a long message, I've been known at Microsoft to put at the bottom / handwritten, because I want to make sure it's not just bullets coming in and text going out and so on, and then being summarized to get into bullets. But so what I come up with is just design explorations personally. It's not even a research project where I'll say to like a GPT-4o, here's my essay, use angle brackets. And I want you to go through my essay and act like an editor. Give me some markups. Tell me what you think. Now, we don't have great tools to do that yet. It's just an example of we can do much better with human AI collaborative work on text generation, something as simple as that, but powerful and nuanced. So I'll stop there, but I think that we want to get going on research in this space and push even harder.
So Eric, I'm enthusiastic to share that my students are way ahead of us in this. They are
good.
designing the
Very
future.
good
So don't
news.
worry, it is being done. They're doing it with or without permission. They are excited and way ahead of us on this. But David, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or what are your students
so
doing?
let me straight. So I'm very much on board with what Eric is saying, and this is certainly in the report as well about sort of best use cases and how do we use it to augment. But I think it is a very difficult design problem, and one of the challenges of that design is we don't know the right criteria to use for what we're designing for. Right, like you said, design something for me that reduce global warming. I'm like, well, I gotta watch my CO2 emissions, right? If you say something that designed for me, what's human complementary, that is, I kind of draw a blank at that point. What does that exactly mean, right? Does it just save you time? Well, lots of automation just saves you time. It needs to be something that makes expertise more valuable, right? Something that's uniquely human that then, has additional in some sense in economic terms, has additional scarcity value. It's more useful, therefore more people want it. And what does that look like? And I think that's hard. I would think of that in a couple ways. One thing I like to think about is, does it enable someone without an elite education? So, 60% of Americans have less than a 4-year college degree. Does it enable them to do, more valuable work, right? Does it open up, software development, law, design, skilled repair, things like that to AI, to people without, who have appropriate training, relevant training. I don't mean everyone can do everything, but haven't had as much formal education and are able to do more valuable work. So that's one opportunity. And that is, I think that, we could really use more competition actually in the professions, right? Our professions are monopolized by professors, by lawyers, by doctors, by, PhD computer scientists, everyone on this call. And, it's great for us. But the truth is, we're a small subset of the labor force, and we get, we command an excess share of resources. It'd be better if more people could do the type of work we do. And that would create opportunity for them, it would create competition for us. So one is this enabling technology, and I hope we can use it that way. That takes design. Another, of course, to say, well, what are the new types of work that we can do that we couldn't do? And this is always where imagination fails most, because we tend to, whenever we see a new technology, we say, well, what does it do that what can we now do with this that we couldn't do before? What cow paths can we pave? And that is not really where the value comes from. Most technologies are valuable because they enable us to do things that we couldn't do before, not because they enabled us the old things, faster. Like I like to give the example of the Apollo guidance computer, right? A little piece of computer hardware, had less processing power than is in your typical washing machine, and yet it got people to the moon. And that was an incredibly creative use of a computing technology. Similarly, we have all kinds of work that we didn't have before because we have tools, right? We didn't have flight. Flight is not automation. We just didn't fly before we had flying machines, right? We didn't have antibiotics. We didn't have all kinds of medical specialties. We didn't have a whole IT sector. But, I think some of that will come, but we don't know where it comes from or how fast it comes. And we also don't know who has access to it. And the problem that we've had with over the last bunch of decades, it's not that we haven't had new innovative types of work, but they've mostly been for elites. It's mostly been new innovative work for highly educated adults. And for everybody else, the quality of work actually, in many ways, has not improved or even eroded because a lot of good middle-class, middle-skill work in production in offices has been displaced, and many people don't have a college degree. They find themselves doing services like food service, cleaning, security, entertainment, recreation, socially valuable activities, but they're not paid well because they don't require extensive training or certification. So most people can do them without expertise. And so that's the challenge I think we face. Not running out of work per se, but creating new work that complements the skills that people have and make them more valuable, not less. And I think that is, that's a question of incentives. It's a question of investment. And we should also ask ourselves, at an even larger level, this is my last point, we have a great opportunity here. Are we ready to handle it well? There are many things that I see that probably all of us see in the world that suggest our institutions that guide good decision-making at every level are eroding rapidly. And we know that these tools can be used for terrible things, and they can be weaponized. They can be used for misinformation. They can be used for making, dread diseases. They can be used for hacking, remote control. So there's a lot to be concerned about. And so it really does come to, it's on us. It's not AI that's going to decide how AI is used. I'm not so enamored by that scenario, but it is on people, and it's a collective decision, and we're going to have to manage it well, and I hope we can.
So David, our audience is speaking or responding a lot to your concept of access and who are the decision makers, who's designing this future.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to quote the science fiction author, William Gibson, who's thought to have said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And then I'm going to hand you, both you and Eric, magic wand, and ask you to change or design the future policy investments in incentive structures that would help us realize this desired future. So here is your magic wand. What do you see would help us?
Yeah, I was going to say, first, there's an example when GPT-4 was still under wraps in last fall. I lofted this project into the air called AI Anthology with permission of OpenAI and Microsoft to share with about 25 experts in different domains the early version of GPT-4 and to ask people, how could this technology be harnessed for human flourishing and what would it take? But one of those people whose essay you can read if you just search on AI Anthology is Trevor Mundell at Gates Foundation. And we sat together, I think it was like around Christmas Eve, working on thinking through his anthology essay. But what we did together was he oversees a lot of the investments of the Gates Foundation. Trevor does in Global South, less developed countries. And we depict example after example of, here's a health practitioner in a small village in this city speaking Swahili, and someone shows up with a fever, they're on HIV medications, help to diagnose without formal medical training. And we were both blown away by the prospects of how these systems could change the way healthcare works in small villages throughout the world. Trevor went on about 3 months, about maybe 2 months after GPT-4 was announced in February, to create a whole investment program in creative projects in this space that are exploring a whole bunch of areas for creating new access, as well as new tools and methods and training for people in less developed world. Magic wand, I think, well, first of all, there's a whole magic wand that I like to swing when it comes to global governance of AI and incentives.
Let's hear it. Swing it. I want to hear it.
Well, I think
what would you do?
We're already seeing some really great work, and look, we might have some setbacks with some of the isolationism we're seeing in the U.S. now, and some of the backing off of some of the work our country did as leading some of these coordinated efforts across the world with AI governance. But thinking deeply through incentive models and programs that put significant funding into areas that might not have subsidies, investments to date. For example, how do we, move beyond just private philanthropy and philanthropic efforts when it comes to really creating access to AI. Think deeply about even the academic limitations right now, what kind of governance and incentive programs and funding that might help academics gain access to the same computing power that large IT companies have now when it comes to building the latest, greatest, biggest models and retraining them and tuning them and so on. The National AI Research Resource, which lofted during the Biden years right now and is still in an initial prototyping phase this next year and a half, is a really great idea for putting, I think, what should be billions of dollars of investment into resources, tools, and training, not just for U.S. Research scientists, but also working internationally on providing resources, data sets, as an example. What are incentives right now, for example, for pharma for sharing out data, raw data to be used internationally by many groups to democratize access to some of the future of scientific advance we're talking about here today? I could see multiple programs. And also on the safety side, we haven't gotten into the downside of biosecurity and AI and issues around concerns with malicious information and media integrity. But there are many things we can do on the side. I know that Daron Sigmilio talks about, some of the downside of AI could have significant influence on productivity and well-being, even beyond.
We're already seeing it, right?
Economics. So I see incentives and governance there being extremely important.
David, the magic wand.
Okay,
Yours.
yeah. So I think I already unveiled my wand too early, in the sense that I was saying
you got a second one. Take a second.
I really do think like steering investment in like these 3 critical areas would be an extremely high priority. I think that's crucial. I also think we do have to get some regulation right. I, for one, am not comfortable with the way intellectual property is protected or not protected in its use for AI, and I think that's create a huge incentive problem for people who create for a living. So I think we got to get that right. And then I guess I want to say that I share Eric's optimism that AI has a lot of potential to be well used in less affluent countries where expertise is scarcer. And most Western technologies actually.
Can you qualify what kind of expertise, David?
Yeah, sure.
I think there is expertise, right?
Yeah,
I think it's a kind of expertise.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So historically, like a lot of great Western technologies were not great for the developing world because they required a set of inputs that were not available, right? You should not be building nuclear power plants unless you have a really good set of infrastructure of scientists and engineers and cooling facilities and all kinds of things, right? But an interesting exception to that was mobile telephony, right? Which turned out to be like arguably more valuable in the developing world than the rich world, because in the rich world we had things on our desktops that did what was on our phone. It wasn't as convenient. But in the developing world, you didn't have access to price information. You couldn't talk to your relatives long distance. You couldn't bank. You were unbanked. You didn't have a phone. So these things were incredibly valuable. I think for AI in the developing world, it creates many threats, many risks. I want to be very clear about that. But some of the upsides: better access to health tools and health information, ability to develop code and software, to do agriculture more effectively. In many ways, we are fortunate to be surrounded by highly educated people who we can turn to experts for many questions. And that just isn't as available in the rest of the world. We think a doctor is hard to get access to. In much of the world, you'd be very, very fortunate to find a nurse. So I think that has potential. But I am concerned, and many dangerous technologies, and we have many dangerous technologies around them. Many of the most dangerous have been hard to proliferate because they were too expensive, right? So we've done a pretty good job of containing nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons are very expensive. You need a lot of expertise and a lot of time, and it's very visible. But that's just not the case for AI. And how we control dangerous uses, I don't know. I know that we will be using a lot of AI to defend ourselves against AI. I know that will be necessary, and in warfare we will see that. We're already seeing that. That's one person's drones attacking another person's drones, so on. So I think we should not assume that the market has the right incentives here. And I think that was the subtext of Eric's comments as well, that laissez-faire, that's not, there's too much risk there. I think we've already seen over the last bunch of decades the downsides of just letting the market rip, letting inequality rise, letting jobs disappear, whether due to technology, due to trade. That makes people rightfully unhappy. And we're a rich country, and we're fortunate to have the resources that we have, and we should use them in a humane way to make sure these benefits are distributed. The tax and transfer system is not my favorite way of doing this. I would much rather do it through work itself, but that requires an investment in making work for many people.
I should say that just to mention, to keep in mind that we can't assume Western liberal democracies are all that we have on planet Earth. We have, authoritarian and autocratic governments, and to think deeply about what it's going to take internationally for the right incentives that promote or protect human rights. What are some global norms when it comes to prohibitions on surveillance? Other aspects that the AI technology, with its sensing and integration and persistence, makes treatises like 1984 look like child's play. So we have to think deeply about how we're going to protect people on this planet when it comes to governments that might not have the same values that we have, maybe potentially working as like-minded nations on coming up with incentives. That's another issue that's very, very important. I think I was going to mention this. It comes to mind. We're talking about economics and productivity and maybe safety and science. One area that I think we could have done better at, well, probably it would be difficult because this is a challenging area in our report that we're focusing on today, that's framing this conversation, is an area that I refer to in my mind, at least, as deep currents of AI technology. So how do we invest more deeply, or can we, in understanding and tracking what I would call subtle but potentially profound longer-term influences with psychological, social, and cultural impacts of AI technologies? Here's what comes to mind for me: human self-identity, human agency, de-skilling and over-reliance on AI, psychological dependence on AI companion systems, and psychological tools that might become commonplace in our world. How do we understand these deeper human and kind of societal implications that might not be the kind of thing we would talk about in like a National Academy study, because it's just too hard to wrap our minds around possibilities there?
What does it mean to be human? We need to wrap up. This could be a conversation. Obviously, we've just scratched the surface of this. I'd love to invite you each to offer one thing. We all have to go back to work after this, presumably, maybe writing emails, maybe writing reports. Any thoughts on what we should be thinking about as we return to our work day, as it pertains to AI and the future of our work, our day-to-day work today? 2025.
You want our comments on that?
Yes, I'd love to hear
Okay.
your comment.
So-
One piece of advice or thought.
Here's my one thought. We will be surprised by
Okay.
how AI
We'll be
is
surprised.
harnessed or used in one or more ways that we haven't really dreamed up just yet or thought much about.
Okay. Surprise is to be expected. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Horvitz.
So
David.
I'm gonna quote my friend, the philosopher Josh Cohen, who said, "The future is not a prediction exercise; it is a design exercise."
Beautiful.
And so we should not just be thinking of our job is just sort of look ahead with our telescope and say what's going to happen. What's going to happen is something we're collectively deciding, and
Yes.
not recognizing that is actually giving up agency. Recognizing that is the
Yes.
first step to make the right things happen. We're all going to be living with those consequences. So we should recognize that we are the people collectively who are making those decisions.
Thank you, David, for justifying my career in human-computer interaction and design. Yes, we are the people who are making these decisions, and it's our obligation to involve more and more people and be thoughtful about that. So the future is not inevitable. We have a role to play. Eric and David, what a treat it was to have you here. For those who didn't get a chance, this is some of the best report reading I can advise. Also, there's been Eric's AI anthologies are in the chat. Those are a beautiful piece of work, and David's written lovely pieces with clever titles like "Can AI Be Pro-Worker?" So I encourage you to follow up on the work of both of these very intelligent people and their many colleagues who wrote that report. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we look forward to having you back when the next report is released. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. And
Thanks
thanks.
for
It was great to see
hosting.
you, Eric, as well.
Nice seeing you, David. Liz.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.